Right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this talk on Rails routing. We've been saying over and over since the beginning of this week and last week that the entry point to every action on your page or on your web application is going to be via a route. So let's see how we define routes in Rails. We've sort of like covered some of it already, like very briefly this morning and yesterday in the previous demos, but I'm just going to show you guys how that's done. In Rails, you have two types of routes, that you can, of routing that you can do. The first one we're going to cover is going to be resource routing. What is this all about? Right. First thing we need to talk about are the HTTP verbs or methods that we can make use of to sort of like make requests to our applications, right? I kind of covered this already in one of my talk, either last week or this week, but these are the verbs that you will have to deal with whenever you do, whenever you have to perform HTTP request to and from a server, right? So we have a get, post, put, patch, and delete action. Now let's see what these verbs, how they are used in the context of Rails. In order to, whenever you're dealing with a model in your application, like if you have a model, in this case, for instance, the article model, you can generate all the necessary routes for this specific resource by using this resource keywords, as you've seen me do so far in the previous demo. So you just drop in this resource articles or whatever the name of the model you wanna create routes for in your config.routes RB, and then it will generate a couple of routes for you. Now the way you want to do this is you type in the word resource, and then the key that you pass in here is going to be the pluralized version of the model name. So if you have article, you need to use articles. If it's person, it has to be people, etc. Okay, and so it will generate the whole lot of routes for you, as you may have noticed this morning. We have about 7 standard RESTful actions that we can perform with our resources within a Rails application or in general. The first one that it will generate for you is going to be the get articles route, which will be connected to your controller action, your controller articles, and the action that will be responsible for handling this request is going to be the index action, right? Now, the purpose of this route is to display list of articles or whatever resources you're dealing with within your application, right? So you want to keep this, like all the naming conventions that we're going to see now, you want to keep that in mind for whenever you're defining routes for your applications, right? The next set of routes that we have are the get and post for creating articles. So the first one is article/new. And then this one will return an HTML form for creating an article. And then the post request will go to articles and will be used to create the article. Now the get is linked to the new action within the same controller, and the post is linked to the create action within the same controller. This is exactly the stuff we've been doing this morning, so nothing new so far. Then you have the show action, which is used to display a specific article or a specific resource. Okay, so if you have a user and you want to show the page for that specific user, you want to pass in the ID for the resource that you are working with on this route. So you first do resource pluralized name of the resource, and then you pass in the ID as a parameter to the route. Okay, so this will display specific resource page. Just like we had with the creation of a resource, in order to edit a resource, we need to do it in two steps. The first step is first getting the form that will, that we will fill in order to edit the resource, and then we need to submit, um, a request after that to process the changes that we want to make. Now you will see that this get request now includes the ID of the resource that we want to edit, because we need to tell the application to go and fetch the current version of the resource that we have in our database, right? We're going to use this ID here to grab the article from the database. With this article, we're going to build a form, right? And the form that is going to get rendered to the user is going to have the existing values of that resource already pre-filled in it, right? And so you will then, once you get that form, you'll be able to modify certain values and submit that form using, a put or patch request to the server in order to update that specific article. And lastly, the final route that will be generated is a delete route, right? To sort of like delete the resource. Okay. So these are the routes that gets generated for you. Now Rails, in addition to every route that you generate here, Rails will provide you with some helper methods that will make it easier for you to sort of like, manipulate or make a reference to these routes within your application. And so for the articles routes, for instance, if you make use of the article underscore path, it will return this route for you. I'll show you this in action in a couple of minutes. The new article path will return you the form that you need to create a new article, and an edit article path taking the ID of the resource that you want to edit will return you this route here. So as an example, if we want to edit the article that has an ID of 11, in order to generate that route, we can do edit article path, pass in the ID of the object, and then it will generate this route for us. Another way of doing this is by passing, if you have the object itself, if you have the article itself that you want to modify, you can also pass it as an argument to the same method, and then it will generate the same route for you. So Rail will extract the ID from that object, and then send it to this method to generate the ID. And then you have the article path that takes an ID, will return you the show path to that article, same as the edit. If you pass in 11, then you get this route here. And you have article underscore URL, which will return you the full domain name of your application, including the path to a specific resource that you requested. Okay, so what it basically does is it takes the path that we have here, and then it adds it to the domain name of your application. Okay. So that's for resourceful routes. The second type of routes that you can define within Rails applications are non-resourceful routes. So these are routes that are not necessarily linked to a resource or model within your application. So it's a route that you can create to perform a random action within your application, right? That is not necessarily tied to CRUD functionalities that we've defined within this section here. So how do you define these routes within Rails? The one thing that is worth mentioning is that you can, if you want to, define the very same routes that we just saw here. You can define them individually without making use of the resource keyword like we did here, but instead manually specify the verb that is connected to every action that you want to do, right? So if we want to create the get route for getting the form to create a new article, we would have to specify the verb get, put in the path here, and then specify which controller is going to handle this request, and what action is going to handle that request, right? You can see that in order to do this, we will have to like write so much code within our routes file in order to define just those routes there. Yeah, but you can do that. When I mentioned that you could sort of like specify other routes without that are not necessarily linked to a resource, you could potentially have an exit that is linked to a session controller with a destroy action to it, which we can use to log out a user, for instance. Okay. Um, Another way you can define routes is with the match keyword. Now, if you use the match keyword with this as a string value, you need to specify using the to keyword. You need to specify, and I actually have a typo here. This should be 2 and then a colon here. Okay, so you specify here the controller that is going to be responsible for handling this request and the action that will be dealing with that request. Okay, and in addition to that, you can use the via keyword to specify what HTTP verb you want to use in order to sort of like deal with this specific resource. Okay. Now that's about everything that I have for you guys on this topic. You can find more about it on this link. You will have further explanations on like how to define routes in like the various scenarios that you have for defining routes. I'm just going to show you a few things quickly within the context of this application. So you notice the first thing that I'm going to point out, well, just as a refresher, is how you get to view the list of routes that you have available in your application, right? And the way to do that is by basically doing Rails route. This is a very handy command that I use, especially when I, get to a new code base that I haven't been working on for a while. It helps me to sort of like figure out what action do I have available within the application, right? Because once I know the routes that I have available, I can easily, find out what controller action is responsible for that specific action, and then go into that specific file and see what exactly is happening in that file. And this is something that you can do, for instance, with the legacy code challenge that you have this week, right? Right now, you are able to navigate through the application, right, and see how things are working within the application. But then how do you then figure out, from navigating on that application or in the browser, how do you then go about mapping every page that you see currently on your browser in the working application to some actual controllers in your application? This is how you find that, because when you list the routes that you have here, you will be able to see, oh, a conversation. We have the link to this conversation here. If I'm getting the page for that conversation, then it's probably linked to conversation article, and the action for that is this action. And then I can go into that file quickly and see the bit of code that is responsible for dealing with that specific part of the application, right? So this is one tip already on how you can navigate the code throughout the week, because this is what your challenge is going to be about. Getting familiar with this code, fixing some bugs if you find any, and then maybe implementing some more features. Okay. So when you list the routes that like this, it will sort of like show you this table where you have the prefix. Now, the way we're going to make use of the prefixes is for doing things like, if I go back to the slide, the prefix are going to be helpful for the path and URL helpers, right? So when you look at this prefix here, we have the root here. So that means if I want to get the root path, I can simply type in root path within my application, and then this should return me the /, right? For instance, what this means is I have a very good example here, for instance, where I'm visiting the / here. I can replace this by root path. Okay. and this will do exactly the same thing as what we had before. The advantage of this is I can decide perhaps tomorrow that the landing page is no longer my /. Maybe for some reason I want the landing page to have this name here. Okay, and so in doing this, if I make use of the root path, I just need to make sure that in my route file I map the root path of the application to this route here, and then I don't have to change this. If I'm using a helper, I don't need to go around and change that value across the application. Rails will automatically pick up that the root path is now this one and no longer this one. Right? This is one advantage of using helper method, for instance, to reference routes within your application. So that's one refactoring we've done there. And so if you're gonna get the articles path, for instance, you're gonna do articles_path. And again, I note that I have a typo here. It should be articles_path, right? You can use the same prefixes to get the URLs to the application. So you can just do, if you want the root URL, we do root URL, and then it will return us the URL for the application. Now, the next column for this table is going to be the verbs that are associated with every path, every resources, right? And then you have the patterns for every single routes defined there. And very importantly, you have a list of controller action that are associated to every route, right? Controller on the left, action on the right. Okay. So by reading this, I can go in I know that this application should have a controller action. Where do we find controllers? Within the controllers folder. And then within that controller, I expect to see some of these actions. Okay. Right. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'm going to move to, I go to route. So at the moment, the route here is going to the landing. I mean, the root path is pointing to this action here. What we did initially when building this application is that we ask Rails to generate all the routes for the articles. In some contexts, you might not need to have all these routes generated for you. Okay, so you probably want to have the route generated only for the create action, for instance, or maybe you just want to list all the all the instances of that resources using the index action, for instance. Now, the way you can do that using resources, if you don't want to go ahead and define just a get action for articles, which will be linked to which you're going to have this controller for articles, right? And then the action is going to have to be index. See that this is a lot of code that we have to type in order to get that single route. Okay. So when I comment out this, I then do Rails route. We'll see that all the other routes are gone. We will only have a get route to the articles. Why are you taking so long? There we go. Right. So we only get this route and the other routes are gone. And automatically it creates me a prefix for my route. There's another way you can do this still using the resources. So you can do resource and then say, I only want you to generate the specific action. Okay. So in this array here, you'll provide a list of actions that you want to generate. If you just want the index, you can just do this, right? And as a result of that, if we do Rails route again, you can see that it will create the very same route that we had by having this line here, right? We have exactly the same output. If we want to create only the index and maybe all the routes that are necessary for creating an article, we just pass in an array here, and then we put in the list of all the actions that we need to perform that action. And we save that, which then generates the routes for us. Computer is very slow today. I don't know why. All right, so there you have it. Okay, so this is how you can restrict the routes that you want to generate for a particular resource. I think you can also do this, where we tell it to generate everything except these 3 routes, right? So when we start Rails, well, sort of like list the routes. We then get the list of all the other routes except except the actions that we specify here. Okay. The reason why I show you this is because I'm gonna be expecting you guys to only generate only generate the routes that you really need for your applications. Okay. One, it's good for security because then you don't expose so many resources that you don't have control on, because you might create a route there for and you don't specify an action, and somehow someone finds a vulnerability and goes through those routes that you don't control and does something malicious to your code. So you want to generate routes that you actually make use of within your application. Don't give the user the ability to make requests that you didn't account for. Okay. So that's the other thing. What else? What else do we talk about here? Whenever you know that by now, hopefully, whenever you're dealing with post or get, whenever you're dealing with post or put, you always have access to the params object that will provide you with a list of, all the attributes that are coming from the form. Okay. Same thing with get. You can also get some attributes from the get request, provided the route has some encoded values in the route, like we have in this case with the ID. Okay. So yeah, that's how you define routes in Rails. Do we have any questions for me at this stage?
So basically, when I generate them, I should even decide what actions apart from the routes. So is it relevant for the security too?
You mean this?
Yeah.
I'm always going to be checking whenever I do code reviews. If I see you've defined routes that are not, linked to an action in the controller, I'm going to ask you to remove that route.
Okay. We try to not do that, but I guess
only create the stuff you actually need, right?
Yeah.
One command that I'm going to have you try out, but that you'll never use it, at least not during the camp, is the scaffold command. I'm going to talk about it in just a minute, but before that, there are some other things that are just that we can actually clean up here. If you remember in the base here, right? Remember how we went about creating this route, right? Now that we know how to make use of those helpers, we can get rid of this, and we know that we have. I should probably bring out I'll bring back this route. And we want the show action for that. So article path. What I can do is go back in there and say So I'm going to replace this and make use of article path helper, which I'm going to pass article ID, right? And so if I run Cucumber again, this should still pass, okay? Because I basically didn't change anything. You can see that this is a much cleaner way to generate routes than what we had before. The other thing as well is that instead of passing, you don't have to specifically pass the ID like I did here. You can simply pass the object itself, and then it'll still do the same job. Run Cucumber again, we'll get the same thing. Right? Everything is still working fine. Okay. Now, my final gift for the evening that you will not get to use, unfortunately, is the scaffold generator. Okay, so let's say, for instance, we want to generate a whole lot of pages and basic CRUD action for what, for instance, for a car, let's say. Okay, so if I do Rails generate scaffold and I say car, what can we give our cars? Actually, let's use a person. So person will have a name of type string. Okay. And a phone number of type string as well. Okay, so let's say we need information about a person. When I do this, look at all the things that Rails will generate for me. And you guys are gonna hate me right now, okay? Because nobody's allowed to use this. Right. First of all, we have a migration that is created for us. This migration here, we know what migrations are going to be used for. It generates a model person for us. It generates all the model specs that we need for that person. It adds the resource routes for people in the routes for us. It go ahead and create a people controller for us with all the respective views that we need to handle CRUD action for that person model. And I create a couple of specs again and some, JBuilders use if we have some APIs. Okay. Now, if I start my Rails server, out of the box, just by running that command, I will be able to create a person. I will be able to edit the person. I will be able to do all the CRUD actions that you can think of on a person without writing a single line of code. Okay, so let's bring this out here. I have to show, let's do browser localhost 3000. Browser's coming. Huh. Of course it fails because, oops, that's not nice. Quit. Browser crashed on me. Anyway, I just realized that I forgot to do something actually, but I need to do it because I just created a new one. Damn, those are some big eyes there. Okay, run that migration, start the server again. Come on, computer, we don't have the whole evening here. Oops, what did I do? Stop sharing. Okay. Rails S, start the server. Come on. There we go. Okay. Localhost is going to show us that. If I go to people, look what I have. I have this page here. I can click on this. I get a form to create a new person. Raul. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? Create that person. When I go back, I see person was successfully created. I can have the information of the person. I can edit the detail of that person. Else magic. Right? And then we update the person. When we get back to the page, the name is changed. We can go back to the list of people, right? We can show them. We can edit them. You can destroy the person. See, all of that has been done for you, right? And if we look at the,
But we can't use it, so.
Right? If we look at the controller, you'll see all the actions that Rails. So you'll get to see like the default way of doing things in Rails, basically. Okay. But you will not be allowed to use this command because we want you to learn the hard way. If you want to, you can generate a scaffold like this just to see how Rails, default stuff. Okay. But if I see a scaffolded code, you're in troubles. Okay. Views. The index looks something like this. The forms. So the way they're handling forms is because we need the same form for both the edit and the create action. They create partial, right? That has this, and then inside the new form, we just render that partial. And in the edit thing, we also render the partial. Okay. So that was the last thing I had to show you today. Awesome, right? But you can't touch it. It's not fair, I know.
Bastard.
Right. Questions from you guys? No questions?
Yeah, wait, for you? Yeah, like, no, but in that, wait, so like in your routes to RP where you use resources and then articles, that's just, articles is just referring to that, that model, right?
Yeah, we are referring to the model.
Okay. And then of course, okay, and then if you
So
run
we
that,
are
then,
basically saying
yeah, and then you have various controller, you have various controller actions, or I guess no routes with controller actions made for you, right? Like the new create and then so forth. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what's happening. It basically generates all the CRUD actions for you.
Right.
All the routes that are necessary for CRUD actions.
Yeah, in the beginning when you showed us like at the very beginning the get and post and all the others, that's ways generate routes or remember the command to do that basically. Like it.
Resources. So you just do resources and then the name of your model, and it will generate all those actions for you.
Okay, so it's okay.
I'm just trying to find my slides quickly, just to show you that. You're referring to this, right? So you do this, and then it generates all these actions for you. I'm going to share the slides with you guys, okay? So you can can check that out. One thing that I really want you guys to check out is this link here. Do give it a read. Okay.
We had a question as well, but it's not about this. It's about coveralls. Not a question, but a clarification. I don't know, Alfred, you're more equipped to ask this question, so do you mind?
Oh yeah, no, it was basically just if for setting up coveralls, I was thinking if it seemed most logical that we would only set it up for the Craft Academy repository that we're all going to push up to, right? Or do you want us to all put up coveralls in our forked repositories?
No, you only need to set it up for upstream. Whatever your upstream use, you set it up there.
All right. That clarifies.
Right. So are we good? Everyone good? One last question for me. Well, you guys have a good one, and I'll see you tomorrow with some more Rails actions.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.